Okay, it's a very hot night, but I thought I would read out my article that was recently published in the ABC, mainly because it's a bit of a heavy article in some ways, or it's long and there's a lot in it. So I totally get it why it might be off-putting for people. But someone close to me said I should read it out and that would help. So this is what I'm going to do. And hopefully this will make it more easily digestible. So it's 30 something degrees. It's a very hot late night in February, and I'm reading out this article on Navalny, who I'm obviously enamored with, and 1 year from the anniversary of his death, which is February 16. So the article's called "Blessed Are Those Who Thirst and Hunger for Righteousness. Alexei Navalny's Christian witness is a spiritual beacon for the West." On the week the world observes the first anniversary of his death, many continue to puzzle over why the Russian politician and founder of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, Alexei Navalny, made the fateful decision to return to his country rather than seek safety in exile, a decision which marked the culmination of a heroic struggle against the despotic regime of Vladimir Putin. In August 2020, Navalny was flown from Siberia to Germany to receive medical treatment after being poisoned with Novichok nerve agent. After spending 2 weeks in a medically induced coma, he slowly regained his health, all the while insisting that he would return to Russia as soon as he was able. Finally, after months of recovery, Navalny landed in Moscow on 17 January 2021, whereupon he was immediately arrested. Over the subsequent 3 years, he endured trumped-up legal proceedings, harsh prison conditions, hard labour and solitary confinement, until he was finally moved to the IK3 penal colony in the Arctic region of northern Russia in December 2023. His health continued to deteriorate under these brutal conditions. He died on Friday, 16 February 2024, at the age of 47. Navalny knew the odds of defeating Putin and achieving political reform was slim, but he and his wife Yulia refused to be deterred. In a recent 60 Minutes interview, this exchange took place between Yulia and Leslie Stahl. Leslie Stahl's the interviewer. She began the interview. "Why did you decide to go back, the two of you? You knew the danger for sure, and do you regret it now?" Yulia, Navalny's wife, replied, "From the first day, when I realized that he would recover after the poisoning, I knew that he would go back as soon as possible." Stahl: "So it wasn't even a debate?" Yulia: "No, of course, I would love to live all my life with my husband, but at that moment I knew that there was just one decision he could take, and it was his decision. I knew how important it was for him." Why was there just one decision Alexei Navalny could take? And why is that decision incomprehensible to so many of us? I would like to suggest that the difficulty we have in understanding Navalny's decision stems from a profound cultural difference. Over the last 50 years, Western culture has increasingly tended to interpret human experience through the lens of power dynamics within a materialistic framework. This view often rejects traditional structures of authority and morality, seeing them as mere tools of oppression. By contrast, Navalny articulates a distinctly Christian worldview in the memoir he wrote in the final years of his life. As he writes in the book's epilogue, "My job is to seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness and leave it to good old Jesus and the rest of his family to deal with everything else. They won't let me down and will sort out all my headaches. As they say in prison here, they will take the punches for me." Since his death, many of his admirers in the West have tended to downplay Navalny's Christianity and secularize his political vision. Something analogous happened to Martin Luther King Jr. Like Navalny, King had every reason to believe that his life would be cut short by his political activism. And like Navalny, King remained undeterred in his pursuit of the kingdom of God and his righteousness. On the night before he was murdered in 1968, at the age of 39, King gave a speech that culminated in this declaration: Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. But unlike the outspoken Baptist pastor, Navalny's Christianity was less politically visible. As he told us in his trial in 2021, the fact is that I am a Christian, which usually rather sets me up as an example for constant ridicule in the Anti-Corruption Foundation, because mostly our people are atheists, and I was once quite a militant atheist myself. In many ways, Navalny's own experience is a reflection of the broader Russian story. Atheism was enforced under the Soviet Union, but under its dissolution, many returned to a revived Russian Orthodox Church. But herein lies the rub. For the despotic regime that Navalny spent his life fighting against is closely affiliated with the same Russian Orthodox Church. Making this even more complicated for many in the West to understand, Navalny does not think of himself as a reformer of the Russian Orthodox Church, but as someone who tries to take part in its rituals and practices, and who even enjoys a sense of belonging. This is Navalny speaking. As for the church and religion, I'm ashamed to say that I'm a typical post-Soviet believer. I observe the fasts, I cross myself when I pass a church, but I don't actually go to church very often. I don't think I could make political capital out of my religious faith. It would just look silly. I don't advertise my belief and I don't hide it either. It's just there, that's all. I am a believer, I like being a Christian and a member of the Orthodox Church. I like to feel part of something large and universal. I would argue that Alexei Navalny embodies a kind of merging of political action with a universal Christian spirit, not dissimilar to Martin Luther King. But how should we best characterize this type of Christian spirit that stands out as both exceptional and countercultural vis-à-vis the secular West? Unlike the new atheists who were all the rage a couple of decades ago, people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, the 19th century atheists tended to have a deep and nuanced understanding of what they were trying to oppose. None more so, perhaps, than the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Consider the beginning of The Antichrist from 1988. Nietzsche writes about Jesus, "This bringer of glad tidings died as he lived, as he taught, not to redeem mankind, but to demonstrate how one ought to live. What he bequeathed to mankind is his practice, his bearing before the judges, before the guards, before the accusers, and every kind of calumny and mockery. His bearing on the cross, he does not resist. He does not defend his rights. He takes no steps to avert the worst that can happen to him. More, he provokes it, not to defend oneself, not to grow angry, not to make responsible." When I came across this passage a few months ago after Navalny died, two things came to mind. First, how astute Nietzsche was in extracting the essence of what makes the figure of Jesus Christ so alien to the modern West, where worldly power, material well-being, and individual rights are held up as being the highest values. Second, this passage could just as well have been written about Alexei Navalny. Like Christ, Navalny did not obtain political power, material longevity, and wealth, attributes commonly associated with Navalny's nemesis, Vladimir Putin. Instead, Navalny followed the spirit of this bringer of glad tidings and provided an example of a different way to live. A telling detail in Navalny's life story is that on the night before he died, he joked with the judge and court officials. Navalny said, "Your Honour, I will send you my personal account number so that you can use your huge salary as a federal judge to warm up my personal account because I'm running out of money. And thanks to your decisions, it will run out even faster. So please send me something. And you guys in the detention centres, pitch in as well. Much like Nietzsche's depiction of Christ, Navalny did not grow angry with those who had just informed him that he had received another 15-day stint in solitary confinement, the 27th time this had happened since he was imprisoned in 2021. By returning to Russia after he'd been poisoned, Navalny also provokes Putin and the Russian government to act, knowing that the likely outcome would be. He takes no steps to avert the worst that can happen to him. Some might argue that, like Christ, Navalny chose not to save himself when he had the chance. This perverse and rather unworldly behaviour is perhaps best captured in a paradoxical saying from the New Testament. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. Matthew 16:25. While Christianity is a vast and complex tradition, in this saying we can discern the essence of the Christian spirit of sacrifice that inspired both Martin Luther King and Alexei Navalny. In both cases, they put a Christian spiritual directive above individual power and material well-being. But what sets Navalny apart from King is his uniquely Russian perspective on the role of suffering. The famed novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky believed that Russians were superior to those in the West because their ability to suffer brought them closer to God and truth. It seems to me that Alexei Navalny also embodies this notion. The suffering he endured during his final 3 years in some of Russia's harshest prisons cannot be overstated. Noting that Navalny was tall and had a bad back, the prison guards often forced him to sit on a small stool with no opportunity to lie down. He also endured freezing temperatures but made light of the situation, writing on X, "It's never been colder than -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Even at that temperature you can walk for more than half an hour, but only if you have time to grow a new nose, ears and fingers." Compared to Dostoevsky's harrowing but humorous account of his time in a Siberian labour camp, The House of the Dead, from 1862, I highly recommend that, Navalny's levity is striking, especially considering the way modern Russian prisons intensify the human cost of suffering. In solitary confinement, Navalny was awoken every hour of every night by a guard filming him to verify that he had not escaped. In many ways, the final weeks of Navalny's life resembled a Christ-like passion. Vladimir Shishkin, founder of the human rights organisation Gulag.net, told the Times of London that on the day Navalny died, he was allegedly forced to spend 2.5 hours in an open-air solitary confinement space where temperatures plummeted to -27 degrees Celsius. After his circulation slowed and his body froze, it is likely a guard delivered a severe blow to Navalny's heart. As Oshishkin explains, "I think that they first destroyed his body by keeping him out in the cold for a long time and slowing the blood circulation down to a minimum. And then it becomes very easy to kill someone within seconds, if the operative had some experience in this. It is an old method of the KGB's Special Forces divisions. They trained their operatives to kill a man with one punch in the heart, in the centre of the body. It was a hallmark of the KGB." For many in the West, Navalny's suffering and death are just part of the harsh Russian reality, in which individual rights and freedoms are often disregarded and life is nasty, brutal and short. But if this were the entire story, Navalny's life and death would not be a cause of continued fascination. In Diary of a Writer, Dostoevsky wrote, "The most basic spiritual need of the Russian people is the need for suffering, ever present and unquenchable, everywhere and in everything." Dostoevsky said that the Russian people, through their suffering, are closest to Christ in their experience. He wrote, "They believe that suffering will purify the heart and soul, will create a higher moral personality, a stronger spirit. I believe this spiritual need, deeply connected to Orthodox Christianity, is key to understanding Navalny's endurance, strength, and good humour. For Russian Orthodox believers, Christ's suffering on the cross is not a morbid historical event, but a profound spiritual expression of faith, particularly because his suffering was unjust. Navalny drew strength from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who thirst and hunger for righteousness, for they will be filled. Matthew 5:6. Like Dostoevsky and Nietzsche before him, Navalny understood that when Christ returned to Jerusalem to be crucified, he achieved no worldly victory, dying a criminal's death, but that he was spiritually transformed through the suffering of his passion. Indeed, Christ's example seems to have provided Navalny with a kind of spiritual directive to return to Moscow. At his trial in 2021, he said, "A man recently wrote to me, 'Navalny, why does everyone write to you? Hold on, don't give up. Be patient, grit your teeth. What do you have to be patient for? I think you said in an interview that you believe in God, and it says, blessed are those who thirst and hunger for righteousness, for they will be filled. Well, that means you're doing great.' And I thought, wow, how well this man understands me, because it's not that I'm doing great, but I've always perceived this specific commandment as being more or less an instruction for action, and therefore, of course, not really enjoying the place where I am. Nevertheless, I don't feel any regrets about having returned, about what I'm doing. Well, because I did everything right. On the contrary, I feel some satisfaction or something, because at some difficult moment I did as I was supposed to according to the instructions, but I didn't betray the commandment." Navalny's reasoning here vividly illustrates the way that Russian Orthodox spirituality is markedly different from the spirituality of the West. As I have argued elsewhere, modern Western culture does not support the belief that human beings have a spiritual nature, unless Navalny's reasoning here vividly illustrates the way that Russian Orthodox spirituality is markedly different from the spirituality of the West. As I have argued elsewhere, in an article I wrote for the ABC also that you can click on in the link there, modern Western culture does not support the belief that human beings have a spiritual nature, unless it is tied to individual material well-being or escapism into nature. Because of this, the Russian idea that spirituality is intimately connected to a dangerous call to action and suffering seems foreign and unrecognizable. To return to the question of why Navalny returned to Moscow despite the certainty of his arrest and eventual death. He returned because, like Jesus before him, he was following a spiritual directive, a call to action. In this light, we see the Christian spirit in Navalny, not extinguished, but shining as a Christ-like example. Christ's words, "What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul?" Matthew 16:26, speak to Vladimir Putin and the West as it becomes ever more enthralled to power, well-being, and material wealth, but denies humanity's spiritual essence. Had Navalny not returned, his life may have been prolonged, but he would have, in effect, committed spiritual suicide, something he could not have tolerated, nor should we.